idea of the left is that this stuff has political solutions. And I strongly disagree. In fact, the evidence is just the opposite. Again, Thomas Sowell makes a really interesting point. He says those ethnic groups that have pursued political objectives in the United States have tended to do the worst economically, and the ones that have ignored politics have tended to do the best economically. It's really interesting. Blacks in the United States have almost always seen politics as the solution to their problems. The Irish also tend to go into politics, and both groups tend to be lower on the spectrum than people of Asian ancestry who tend to do the best economically and avoid politics like the plague. Okay? Asian Americans have never gotten in any significant way into politics at all. They just focus on economics. And guess what? It works. They achieve goals economically where they don't achieve them. In fact, I want to tell you a quick story that really fascinated me because, again, you don't hear as much about this because it breaks down the binary concepts of racism that the left wants to promote. But one of the most discriminated against groups in the history of the United States was the Chinese. Yep. The Chinese were horribly, horribly discriminated against throughout the 19th century. I mean, there were laws, basically saying, we'll let in white people, we'll let in black people, the Chinese, need not apply. And I learned about this in a fascinating story I came across that basically started like this. There are 17,000 McDonald's restaurants in the United States. Huge chain. Do you know what there's more of than that? Do you know what beats McDonald's just going away? It's not a chain, but Chinese restaurants. Wow. There are 30,000 Chinese restaurants in the United States. Wow. Well, how did that happen? Well, back in the 19th century, and it's very important to notice that our American taste for exotic food is very recent. As recently as the 60s, there were not exotic restaurants as a rule in the United States. You couldn't get Thai food, you couldn't get vegetarian, there was none of that stuff. Okay, if you went to a diner, you got a hamburger. There's all of these crazy cuisines are a very recent thing in America. So for most of American history, they were not there, except the Chinese restaurants. They were there. What started the Chinese restaurants? Because Chinese immigrants couldn't get hired by anybody. No one would hire. There were laws against hiring the Chinese. Everyone hated the Chinese, so they said, listen, let's just see if we can do this in our favor. We'll make restaurants with special food that only we know how to make. And it worked. And it's gone from the mid-19th century. I never had any idea it went this back. It's going back to the 1850s. Till today is Chinese restaurants all over the United States, and virtually all of them to this day are owned by recent immigrants. How does that work out? Because the recent immigrant, if you're a Chinese immigrant and you run a Chinese restaurant, once you've made enough money so you're okay, you sell it to newer immigrants. And they come in, the new ones come in and buy, they make some money, and once they're financially okay and they're ready to enter the mainstream of society, then they sell it to the next group of new immigrants. So they're virtually all owned by recent immigrants, and they keep passing it down the line. And as I said, Chinese people in the United States do better than Americans do. Sorry, it's getting late. Better than white people in America do. They actually do better than the mean. My statement is probably correct. They do better than the American mean. Avoiding politics altogether and focusing on where the real opportunity is, which is capitalism. And frankly, every single attempt that I can see where we tried to solve racial issues through politics, which is my final left-wing error, has failed. One of the most obvious examples is Barack Obama. Remember when he was supposed to solve all of our racial problems? How did that one work out for you? Did you know that black Americans lost ground on essentially every single solitary measure of social progress under Barack Obama? It was the worst 8 years in the history of the United States in terms of black Americans losing ground economically, and in terms of college graduation, high school graduation, crime rates, everything went backwards under Barack Obama. Do you know what was the best year for the best 8 years for black Americans? In what 8 years did black Americans gain the most ground?
I bet it was Nixon.
Ronald Reagan, that's right. Okay? Nobody wants to talk about that, but that's what the truth is. So these political solutions, kind of like the Rhodesia I talked about before, and it's not just Rhodesia. We just celebrated the 70th anniversary of the independence of India. Okay? And that's very nice. But you know what happened when the British left India? A massacre, that's right. Millions. It made the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda look like a cakewalk. Okay? Millions and millions of people were killed in sectarian violence. The fact is, the British kind of had a knack for running things, you know? And I'm here in Boston, this is heresy, I realize. But, you know, the British were really good at kind of keeping the peace everywhere. And the idea that just getting rid of your oppressors politically suddenly solves your problem is supported by no evidence at all. Do you know when India finally started getting their act together as a country? 1991, when they discovered, drumroll please, capitalism. In 1991, the Indians decided to dismantle this whole socialistic apparatus that might micromanage the whole economy and have freewheeling capitalism a la Margaret Thatcher. And you know what? Their economy's been booming ever since then. It's capitalism that is the tool for successful minorities. So anyhow, so here is my conservative thoughts on racism, my solutions. Number one, rights belong to the individual, not to the group. A society that sees its job as dividing up all of its production by ethnic group is a society that's heading for a race war. When you say, oh, we got to give this much to the blacks and this much to the whites, okay? It is individual rights. Our founding fathers were absolutely right. Rights belong to individuals, not groups. The second is that the culture belongs to everyone. The great thing about culture is just like the Chinese food, you can partake in it anytime you want. And this is very important because of this idea on the campuses about cultural appropriation. When I was in Oregon this summer, and I had a lovely time in Oregon, but while I was there, there was a tortilla shop in Portland that was forced out of business because it came out that the owners were white. How can white people sell tortillas? They were literally mobs attacking their restaurant because white people aren't allowed to sell tortillas, apparently. Okay? You think this is going to lead to racial harmony? No. Okay? Having mob attacks because you're selling, food that belongs to some other ethnic group? Okay? This is not the way to peace. Nope. Number three, peace and freedom come from the people, not the government. Political solutions don't work. The government is a very blunt instrument. It's not a good way to get people along with it. It's like a hammer, okay? It smashes things. And everything looks like a nail. Okay? Next one is that capitalism is the way to prosperity for every minority group that's ever tried it. Capitalism is great because it allows you to succeed based on what you can do, not on who you are. You don't need anyone's approval. If you've got a better mousetrap, that's all that matters. The next one, and this is important, is that everyone is responsible for their own actions. Nobody is responsible for their ancestors' actions. And it seems so obvious, and yet we're dealing with this all the time. And the reason why is important, it's not that history doesn't matter. Of course history matters. History affects all of us. You can't understand today without understanding history. But if you start playing this game, it's the ethnic grievance game of what ethnic group, screwed over my ethnic group, there is simply no end to the matter. This is going to go on forever. Should the Anglo-Saxon Britons, rise up and throw off the Normans who, conquered them? I mean, there is not a single ethnic group on the planet that at some point hasn't oppressed somebody and been oppressed by somebody else, okay? You want this to stop, it stops with the current generation. It's no fair bringing in ancestries. And then, as I said before, no stats. Because there is no guarantee. As long as people are free, okay, so if you show me a society where people are being prevented from pursuing their own dreams, there I got a problem, regardless of who it is. Because that's an incredibly important right, that you're free to pursue your dreams. But we do not look at the statistical results, because the statistical results are never going to be even, ever, ever, ever. They never have been, and they never will be. And then finally, I said I would go back to tribalism, because that was the third kind of racism. There's condescension, where I think I'm just better than you are, which is bad, but not the worst. There's ethnic grievance, which is the worst, because it makes me want to get you, not just think less of you, but hurt you. And then the third kind of racism is tribalism.